Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today I'm really excited to have Tim Larkin here. I've wanted Tim to be on this podcast for like the last 4 years. I met him in 2012 at a Tony Robbins Platinum Partner trip where he was showing us men in slow motion how to kill people in self-defense. It was memorable, let's just put it that way. This was the relationship plat trip where the females were learning something else, which I won't say was interesting, sexy, sort of thing. And then the men were learning self-defense, but in a very powerful and impactful way. So that was from Tim Larkin, and target focused training, TFT, was what I learned. Tim is author of When Violence is the Answer, published by Little Brown. He's also author of Survive the Unthinkable. He is a teacher, a father, an author, of course, and a legend. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hey, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for having me, Stephan. I appreciate the persistence too. Finally got this happening.
Absolutely. You're totally worth it. I'm so excited for us to go into some of these important topics around self-defense. So first of all, what inspired you to get into this field in the first place?
You know, I was a Navy brat, and so I lived on Navy bases most of my school during my school years. Originally, probably the first encouragement I got was from my grandfather. He was from Boston. He believed every boy needed to learn how to protect himself, and very early on he taught us, boxing, and he loved the sport of boxing. What was really interesting, though, the one thing that was seminal in that was I couldn't have been more than 6 years old, and he had us down in the basement. He had a big house in Boston. The basement was where we went down to learn how to box. And my cousins and I were down there, and he would tell us all the time. He'd go, "Okay, boys, this is what you do in the ring, and this is how you go." And then he'd stop, and he pointed to the basement window that went out to the street, and he said, "Listen, boys, if anybody," he goes, "in the ring, you have to, there's the rules, and you abide by the rules, and you do your best, and all of that." But then when he pointed out the window, he said, "But if anybody out there tries to hurt you," he goes, "you don't play by the rules." He said, "You need to protect yourselves, and and then he'd show us things that were completely different than the competition training we were doing with boxing. He would show us, real injury to the human body. I remember probably the first thing that I learned, and again, I'm 6 years. I don't think my mom had any idea what my grandfather was teaching us. But he basically, I mean, one of the first strikes he ever showed us that had a real injury behind it was a strike to the bladder. And the bladder is if you go where your belly button is and you go down about 2 to 3 inches, that's basically where your bladder resides. And the reason he taught us that was because he said, men always try to protect their groins. And he said when they try to protect their groin, he goes, they highlight the bladder. And the bladder's a much easier strike for you. And it was, at the time, I'm 6 years old. I was like, okay, what are you talking about? But years later, what I realized was my grandfather, because, he had to protect himself. He came from a very rough Irish background. He understood that, once we are outside approved rules and agreed upon, sporting, that it can get really bad very quickly for somebody that doesn't understand how to use violence. And he had been around people that understood how to use violence. And he was the one that connected areas of the human body that can't be protected, basically, no matter how much you work out, no matter how much you condition yourself. And he taught me the basics of injury to the human body and the response to injury. And that was my first introduction to that. And then being a Navy kid, my dad was an officer in the Navy. We moved all around. And I did a ton of martial arts and boxing at all the bases. Every base, mostly would be the Marine Corps. The Marines would run programs for kids. They always had, like, if you went to the gym, we learned, like, they teach us to box, they teach us to wrestle, they taught us judo. It was really cool. It was great growing up. I was talking basically about my grandfather, that he basically was the first one that taught me injury of the human body. And then going to the, my years as a young kid, I was exposed to this very early on. I'm in my early 50s. And so my generation, it was kind of acceptable. It was kind of, you're expected to be able to fight. And, even when I went to my high school, I went to all boys Catholic high school. And if you had a problem with somebody, you were encouraged to get in the ring with them, a boxing ring, and you worked it out. And so we were very comfortable with the idea of violence, not to be violent, but that there was a time and a place for it. Sometimes it could be a very healthy outlet if you did martial arts or combat sports, or sometimes it could be really, detrimental if it was used criminally. So for some reason early on, that became kind of something that I was exposed to. And of course, being a Navy kid, one of the last places I ended up was we lived literally on Coronado Island in Navy housing. And right across the street, literally my backyard looked at a small highway called the Silver Strand Highway. And right across there with a Constantine wire covered, chain link fence was the SEAL Command. And that was where the very famous obstacle course for BUDS training was right there. And as a young kid, I was like, I think I was 13 years old when I first jumped the fence. And my brother and I, we jumped the fence and we started playing on the obstacle course because we had no idea what the SEALs were. We had no idea what this was. We just knew there were these crazy guys that would, get to jump out of airplanes, blow things up. And we couldn't believe that was a real job. And so I started hanging out with these guys called the SEALs as a young kid. And they thought at first we were annoying to them. And then they realized we weren't going anywhere. And that they figured they'd just let us hang out. And they started to educate us on what was what. And so I learned everything and this is in the late 70s, early 80s. I learned everything there was to know about SEAL training back then. And back then it wasn't popular. Like nobody knew who the SEALs were. It's not like it is today. As a matter of fact, you were discouraged. I later went, I was very, very impressed with that. And so my only goal from being 13 on was I wanted to be in the SEAL teams. And my father, who was a Navy officer, who wasn't a SEAL, he was in regular Navy, he thought it was a passing fantasy. And he said, okay, he goes, but listen, go to school first. I want you to get your degree. And so I got an ROTC scholarship. I went to USC, but all I wanted to do was be in the SEAL teams. And what was interesting was back then, it was highly discouraged because the SEALs back then, under the Cold War, they weren't as active. They weren't as important as like the nuclear assets were, like other parts of the Navy were far more prestigious. You were treated almost like the redheaded stepchild if you went into the SEAL teams at that point. So, I got exposed to that and I got into that. And now all of that, I had all this martial arts and combat sport background before I got into the SEAL teams. And I told you guys that, I told you how, my grandfather taught me injury to the human body, and I didn't realize how much injury to the human body was going to play in my life. And to give you the very short version, I was overly qualified and ready for my SEAL training when I got it. I got 2 slots. There were 2 slots available. I got one of 2 slots. 2,500 guys went for it in the officer corps, and I got one of those 2 slots. And I used that to my advantage. All that knowledge that I had to get through training. And I was flying through. I was the number 1 guy. I was arrogant about it. I was weeks away from finishing the training and going to SEAL Team 4 back then. I'd already been assigned my team I was going to go to. We had basically a very basic dive one day, and I was congested, and I forced myself to do the dive because I didn't want to do a makeup dive later in the week. And I ended up blowing my eardrums. And if anybody's ever had that happen, when you blow your eardrums, you have a sensation called vertigo. And it's where you lose all sense of balance at that point. And here I was, I was in the peak of my conditioning at that point. And yet this was my first real introduction to injury to the human body. I had no control over my body. I couldn't will my way out of it. I couldn't do anything. And of course, it ended my career in the SEAL teams before it even started. Now, they kept me in the community, not as a SEAL, but they sent me to intelligence school, and I became a special warfare intelligence person, which was very interesting. I had a job that was incredible. I was a very junior guy in a very senior command. I got to work with everybody in the community. But what was interesting was that command, back then, the Berlin Wall had come down. Cold War was over. And the SEALs that I was at this command with, the Admiral ran it. He ran it for all the SEAL teams. It was Naval Special Warfare Command. It was a brand new command. We were the first plank, they call it a plank owner when you're a new command is created and you're on it. I was a plank owner there, and I was surrounded literally by the legends of the SEAL teams. I had no business being there. They gave me the intel slot because of my background, and they liked me, but I had no combat experience or anything like that. But yet I was surrounded by the guys who were just the guys back then. They foresaw everything that's happening right now. They foresaw basically the wars that we're in now. They saw how Bosnia and Herzegovina were going to happen. And they realized that their method of training for the Cold War now had to be replaced for these basically tribal wars, these house-to-house wars, where we're going to put hands on people again. And they realized that the hand-to-hand combat training had really been kind of set aside for the last 20 years since Vietnam. And they started looking at it again. And I was invited to be part of the pilot program only because I was a young guy and I had a martial arts background and these guys liked me, not because of any other reason. I had really no business being in there, but they thought it would be good for me to be part of it. That is really where target focused training started, because what was interesting was the individual that I ended up finding this guy randomly and bringing him in. I mean, it was dumb luck. It was dumb luck that I found this guy. But the guy that we brought in to help us basically taught us how to exploit all the weak areas of the human body, combat sense. And it was fascinating. It was fascinating to learn how to train any human being to protect themselves. That was the really interesting part. It was like a great equalizer, because the areas of the human body that we're talking about, and we know some of them, like the throat, the eyes, those are pretty normal. But as I talked, like the bladder, there's approximately 120 areas in the human body that cannot take trauma when applied to it. Meaning, no matter how much we work out, we can't protect these areas. And this guy, basically, he was a former Vietnam vet, and he really understood this. Not as an academic. He certainly wasn't an academic at all. He's very much self-taught, but he was brilliant. He could see arcs and angles that other people couldn't see, and he answered questions that weren't just dealing with, say, hand-to-hand combat, or say like fighting in a ring. You could tell him, hey, we carry this type of equipment, or we'll have this type of kit, this type of a backpack on. This is my my rifle that I carry. Here's my side, and he could synergistically make all that stuff work. Because when you understand how the body responds to trauma, you understand that what makes a human being dangerous is an active brain, and your first tools available to you are your body tools. And that when you train somebody, male or female, how to use their brain and body to protect themselves in this universal sense, everybody's equal. It's really interesting. I mean, you can have people that are much smaller be able to injure much larger people, because they're not trying to compete with strength. They're not trying to compete with athleticism. They're going directly to an area of the human body that can't take trauma. And if you know how to exploit that, you can save your own life. Now, I thought it was only going to stay in the special operations community. I really thought what we were learning was far too extreme to ever be taught to civilians. So pretty much I stayed in for a couple of years. And then really right after Gulf War I, there really wasn't much to do in the military, and everybody was getting out. And so I started doing contract work. We were doing like Blackwater type work before Blackwater existed. I was working mostly in South America and Venezuela, and we were training all sorts of, foreign military, foreign law enforcement, And we were all doing it through the State Department to do that. And it was fascinating, during those years to be training like that, especially working like the counter narcotics stuff that was down there, everything that was going on during that time. And it was interesting how those skill sets, those skill sets of using your brain and your body were far more important than learning how to use a lot of the tools, a lot of the weapons and stuff like that. Because without your brain and body correctly trained, you're not as effective as you think you are with these tools, because if I don't have the gun on me or if I don't have the knife on me, I feel like I can't protect myself. And that's just not, what we're really big on is the idea of training your brain correctly first on how to look at violence, and then coordinating your body tools to be able to affect injuries on another human being. What you experienced in our training was the basic foundation that we put in. And you talked about, the slow, deliberate training that we were learning. That's the baseline that you use for everybody. And it's really counterintuitive. Most people think when you train, violence, or you train to protect yourself or self-defense, everybody sees it as having to be ballistic and full speed and, just completely focused on hard and fast. And what you realize is that speed actually can end up being your enemy if you don't lay a good foundation. And so what's really interesting is I can train some of the most unlikely people to be very proficient at protecting themselves using methodologies that cause most people to scratch their heads. The slow deliberate training like you're talking about. And the reason being is because most of us think of, hand-to-hand combat or anything like that as some sort of a competition. And, we really like we go to like the UFC or any of the combat sport events that we see. And oftentimes that gives regular people an excuse not to train, because they'll look at these amazing athletes who are just incredible, doing incredible things in the octagon or in the ring, saying, well, I could never do that, so it's not worth it for me to even train. And nothing could be further from the truth, because the reason people we can create contests like the UFC or any of the combat sport contests is because we're able to gamify violence. And the only way you can gamify violence is take out what? Direct injury to the human body. So the last time I looked at the rules of the UFC, there were 31 rules. 27 of those rules prohibited direct injury to the human body. So it's kind of like that idea. If you just flip things on end, you'd say, well, gee, if I didn't want to deal with bigger, faster, stronger, and somebody who's much more athletic than me, how could I bypass that? Well, it looks like what the rules tell me, go right to direct injury to the human body. And all of a sudden, no matter how big, fast, and strong this individual is, if I'm successful in injuring them, they're going to have to focus on their injury. And that's the disconnect that most people don't understand. Most people tend to see a competitive sport like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu or, any of the great combat sports that we have, and they equate that with being able to protect themselves. And actually, that's really not true when it comes to the stuff that we're really concerned about, which is like criminal violence or any of the things that you saw this summer where people were being pulled out of their cars, and some of the different violence that we saw during the pandemic. You saw people having to deal with real situations, and you also saw people deal with them poorly. You saw people who weren't equipped to protect themselves try to protect themselves, and it went horribly wrong because they didn't understand how to navigate violence. And that to me is the most incredible thing is I'm able to use this highly specialized military training that we did that was designed really for special operations personnel to immobilize any threat right off, and I'm able to give it to civilians in a very sober, straightforward manner, whereas most people wouldn't say, they wouldn't see how you could train civilians, what the need would ever be for them to have information like this. And what I found interesting was training civilians is actually more rewarding to me than training the military and law enforcement. And understand what I mean. I love training the military and law enforcement guys, and it's great, but I expect them to do well. They also don't operate alone on oftentimes. They're usually with their team, and they have tactics and they have equipment. The one thing that got me was after I started training some of the civilians after 9/11, I had a doctor reach out to me. He was in inner city. I think it was Cincinnati. It was Cincinnati, Ohio. And he went to an inner city hospital to perform a brain surgery on a young kid that had a swollen brain. And the child was dying. He goes to park his car. He had a nice car, and he parked it in the parking lot at the hospital. He immediately was attacked when he got out. There were guys waiting there, trying to, obviously it was a nice car and they were going to try to grab it. Here's this doctor going in to save this kid's life. They come at him with a knife. He sees an opportunity to put an injury on somebody. He immediately does that injury, takes the first guy out. The second guy sees what he did and takes off running. He just takes off running because they didn't expect any resistance. Security sees it on the camera. They come in, they take over and arrest the guy as the doctor goes in, performs surgery, saves the kid's life. And the first thing he did was he came out, he washed up, and he wrote us and told us right away what he experienced. And when I got that, that's when I realized, I said, okay, this never should have happened to this doctor going to, save a kid's life. And yet, it did. And he was able to protect himself because he took a 2-day course with me, basically, which people say you can't learn anything in 2 days. And I agree. If you're trying to be a world-class UFC fighter, 2 days is not going to do it. If you want to learn how to use violence to protect yourself, the tool of violence, it's a very easy, straightforward skill set, and you can learn a lot in 2 days.
Right. Yeah, well, it was in 2012 when I took your training it was in Cabo. I remember learning about reaction partners and going in slow motion and punching somebody in the neck, popping their eardrums by making a cup and coming at them from both sides. I remember scooping out their eyeballs as if it's like in a little cocktail glass. What else did I learn? Taking out their knee, or it's actually the between the knee and the ankle, going between the knee and the ankle. If you can get some leverage and just breaking their femur, or which bone is that? Breaking that bone in half, that long bone. So I haven't practiced any of that. That was 8 years ago, and I still remember those things. I could pull some of those out if I needed to, if I were in a life-threatening situation.
Well, and that's by design. You were taught principles, and so this is one of the big things. Like a lot of people, when they look at self-defense or any sort of even a martial arts training, a lot of that is technique-based. So you learn techniques. But what you learned areas of the human body that don't change. They're in here, and the approach that we took, because we went slow and deliberate, and there's a kinesthetic portion of it where you're touching and pushing through these areas. It's just a learning methodology that's superior, and your retention is really quite surprising. I've had people that literally, like yourself, it was years ago that they trained with me. Something happens, and then that one part of the human body just shows up to them in the incident. They see whatever the predator, avails them to, maybe by pulling them in close. Maybe it's the throat. Maybe it's the ear. Maybe it's a groin. And they understand what to do with it. It's not a question of, when you're talking about this, when I train a client, I could not train them, throw them in a ring with a very accomplished fighter and not understand the outcome is going to be horrible for the person I just trained. Because again, they're training under those rules, those conditions, and that situation. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a predator who does not fear you gives you an opportunity. They pull you in close. They don't injure you. You can still think and move. And you now know how to exploit that one area of their human body to put an injury on them. And then you see another area, and then you keep putting injury on them until they're no longer a threat. They're non-functional to you. And what's interesting about that is unlikely people, because of the surprise factor, are able to protect themselves in ways that you would never think possible. I mean, I have numerous examples of my clients, attacked by bigger, faster, stronger people who did not fear them, but gave them an opportunity to exploit. And my client knew what to do, and they were able to save their life.
Yeah. So it's like the perpetrator, the attacker, is using the element of surprise oftentimes to kind of get, I don't know, try and get your car or break into your home or whatever, but then you're using the element of surprise when they're not expecting it with your skilled reaction and causing injury to them.
Right. Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. I had one of my women that went through my training, and it was really rough for her. She went through training. She had been attacked before. Her husband brought her to the training. She had a therapy dog. It was a German Shepherd, but it was still a therapy dog. And there were times where she literally had to get off the training area and just, breathe and stuff, because she was reliving some of her PTSD from the attacks, especially when the knives came out, because she was taken at knife point before. So she was one of those people. And Stephan, the interesting thing is, and I tell every class, I'm sure I told your class the same thing. Statistically, I don't know who it's going to be in the room, but somebody's going to have to use the information. That's how it always works out. And it's never who I think might have to use it. Like the people that are like maybe the military guys or the law enforcement guys, I think I'm going to hear from them. And sometimes I do hear from them. But what I end up usually hearing is from really an unlikely person, or a person like her that I said, I remember talking to one of my instructors, and we both said, I just hope she gets a pass the rest of her life. She's a good person. She made it through training, but this was really rough for her. She had to really relive a lot of things that were tough. Sure enough, I think it was about 6 to 8 months later, I hear from her husband, gets sent the police report. She was at like a Home Depot. She had bought some flowers that she was going to plant, and she put her dog into the kennel that she had in the car. She kenneled her dog, and she started taking the flats of flowers, putting it in the back of her car. She wasn't really paying attention, and she heard from behind at one point. She heard somebody say, "Can I help you?" And she said, the nonverbal just kicked in. She felt the hair in the back of her neck go. She goes, "It's happening again." And sure enough, just as she's thinking that, this guy scoops her up, just scoops her right up, and he starts trying to take her away. Well, she realized that she was concealed carry, but she realized she couldn't get to her gun. And she goes, "It was like you guys were in my ears. I heard, if it's not in your hand, it's not your primary weapon." I mean, this is somebody who literally had 2 days of training with us and had experienced violence before. And she said, "Oh, I can't get to my gun, but my elbow is free. And I know I can turn it back into this guy and strike him in the neck." She understood that was a viable target, the side of the neck. The side of the neck has a vein, an artery, and 2 nerves. And when you strike it, you can create 2 things. You can create a concussion. If you hit it, really hard, you can create a concussion, or you can cause the person to faint from a vasovagal response. And all that means is you interrupt blood flow, and all the blood drains out of the head to the brain to protect the body, and it puts you to sleep. So either one of those results is good for you. And sure enough, she threw all of her weight into twisting and hitting this guy on the side of the neck. He let go of her as he started to kind of fall and faint. And then she saw his knee, and she stomped on his knee, which ended up breaking the knee cartilage, and the guy was on the ground. He hit his head on the ground. He was dazed. He came back up, grabbing his knee, screaming. And what was funny was people then from the parking lot all started to come around. They started to see what was going on. And he pointed at the woman and he said, "She attacked me. She attacked me." And her comment was, "Well, it's kind of true. I did." But she saved her own life. And of course, when the police came, they asked her, they said, well, you had a gun on you. Why didn't you shoot? You would have been well within your rights, even after striking him and knocking him to the ground, to shoot him to make sure that he didn't get back up. This guy has a rap sheet, a mile long. Sure enough, he had the panel van, he had the line, he had everything. He was going to take her to a secondary area, either sexually assault her or just kill her. That was this guy's MO. And, they played all that in the cameras. But what was really interesting was, here was this woman who had experienced violence before, really didn't think of herself as anybody could take care of herself. But because she had principles and methods that she didn't have to memorize, and that she just had knowledge of, she was able to protect herself in one of the most unlikely circumstances, and it's real people like that that excite me, when I reach those people, because so many of us have been sold a bill of goods saying that if you're not a world-class athlete, you somehow can't protect yourself. If you're not bigger, faster, stronger, you can't protect yourself. And really, that's not it. What makes us all dangerous, as I said at the beginning, is the human brain. The human brain is something that sets us apart from the rest of the species. And it allows us, we are not the biggest, fastest, and strongest. If we had to be the biggest, fastest, and strongest to be the primary species, it wouldn't be us. I tell people all the time, who wants to, I'll get a 10 by 10 cage. I'll get a 65-pound mountain lion that hasn't eaten in 2 days. And who wants to jump in the cage with it, and nobody wants to do that. Animals have much faster reflexes. They're far stronger than us. They're far more lethal with their body tools. But the reason, we are more dangerous is because of our brains. We're able to create tools. We're able to hunt in packs. We understand how to do all that. It's the same thing when it comes to your own self-protection, And what's interesting is, unfortunately, I gave you a story of two people, the doctor and this lady, that had to use the information. What's really rewarding is, why is it worth studying this stuff? Like, I'm sure some of your people might be listening to this going, yeah, I don't know. Why would I ever need this? What most of people get out of my training is they start to have a situational awareness that they didn't have before. Because once you understand violence, and once you understand what you'd have to do to another human being to protect yourself, none of us want that. Nobody wants to participate in violence. You really don't. And the way I try to convey that to everybody is, usually in the class, I might have done it with your class, I'll ask everybody, hey, how many people in here know how to swim? And everybody will, put their hand up. Most people know how to swim, so their hands up. I go, okay, keep your hand up. Well, but then stick with me then, because then I'll say to people, I'll go, okay, of those that had to swim, that know how to swim, how many of you have ever had to swim for your life? And a much less number of people, but I will keep my hand up because I've had to swim for my life a couple times. And then I'll say, of all those people that had to swim for your life, how many of you would ever want to experience that again? And all the hands comes down. Everybody's hand comes screaming down because they survived it. It's nothing they want to do. That's what real violence is. Real violence is something that you survive and you never want to experience it again. If you hear people bragging about, oh, I kicked this guy's butt or I did all, they chose to use violence in a situation where it wasn't imminent. It wasn't, you weren't devoid of choice. What my clients understand is, if there's choice involved, the answer is always no. Meaning, if I can leave, I leave. If I can talk my way out of it, I talk my way out of it. It's only when you're devoid of choice, when you're facing imminent grievous bodily harm, you have no escape, you have no way. If you could have talked your way out of it, you would have. If you could have exited, you would have. That's when the tool of violence is necessary and used, and that's when you need this kind of knowledge. But what's interesting is, the more people train in this subject, and I get this from some of the most unlikely people, they tell me all the time, they go, wow, the old me would have experienced this situation that I experienced today this way. And I probably would have done something stupid that would have given the potential for me to get in a violent situation because I was ignorant. I didn't know. But after understanding violence and training, how to do this, I understood to get out of there right away and just leave. And even if my ego is damaged, that's fine. My ego can be damaged. They can call me names, they can do whatever, but I got myself out of there. And what's really fascinating is all the things people think about after training that they need to change in their lives. And I basically call that, the idea of how many of you are sleeping with your head on a railroad track and thinking you're okay because the train didn't come last night. And my only goal with everybody is, hey, take your head off the railroad track, then you don't have to worry about the train. It doesn't matter if the train comes because you're not in the way. And that analogy really hits people because they start seeing, wow, I was taking all these unnecessary risks, meaning, something simple like, yeah, it was 10 o'clock at night and I decided to go to the ATM. But I got away with it. So no big deal, right? Well, I show people all the time, I show people videos of people going to the ATMs after dark, precipitously after 8:30. Attacks at the ATM are huge. And I showed this one picture, this one scenario of an older couple, and they get attacked, viciously attacked. And so I asked people, I even asked people in my, in my world, other professionals, to evaluate, the video. And everybody says, oh, well, it was a couple. It was an older couple, a man and his wife. The wife goes to the ATM and the man, they're both looking at the ATM. And people are saying, well, he should have been looking out towards the parking lot and, what she's doing. And they come up with all these tactical scenarios of what people should have done. Nobody looked at the timestamp. So then I have everybody look at the timestamp. Timestamp was 10:35 at night. And I said, how many times do you think they've done this? How many times do you think they have gone to the ATM after dark thinking it's no big deal and almost it's their right to do that? And granted, they have the right to do that. But what was so important, they had to get their money that night at that time that they couldn't have woken up in the morning 20 minutes earlier to go to the ATM during the day where the risk is just, next to nothing, for these types of events to happen. And that's what I'm talking about. People get so surprised when I talk about, prevention like that. They think, oh, no, you're the guy that wants to always use violence on people and stuff. No, I'm the last person that wants you to have to use the tool of violence because I understand what that means. But what's interesting is the more highly trained somebody is in the lethal applications of the use of violence, the more peaceful their life is. Because they understand, they make better decisions. They don't take the bait. They don't get involved or triggered by events that other people get involved in. And I'll give you a perfect example. I had tons of people during the protests calling me up saying, the old me would have gone to a protest for whatever side it was. I would have attended this. I would have gone in. I would have told that's all right. And they were all saying, not because they're weak people or anything, but they said, you know what? The risk reward is just not there. And it's not worth me. I can show support in other ways. Whatever side you're supporting, I can do that without risking the irrationality that sometimes can happen in mob think. And it was great to get emails like that from people and reports from people just thanking me, that, hey, your book was just reaching out to me during this time. I remember reading X, Y, or Z, and that kept me from doing this. And the old me would have done that. And stuff, to me, that's way more rewarding than the people that unfortunately have to use the information. Because if I can get you to be situationally aware and make better decisions to avoid the potentiality for violence, then I've really done my job.
Right. So an example of that, if a woman is walking alone in a parking structure, looking at her phone, head down at the phone, and she's wearing a ponytail, for multiple reasons, she's a much easier target. So situation awareness would say that no ponytail, look up, don't even be parking in a parking structure that you're going to have to get into late at night that isn't surrounded by people where she would be alone. Like, there's a bunch of reasons why she would be an easy target because of that scenario.
Yeah, and these things, you nailed it, Stephan. These things are the most dangerous thing. This is absolutely capturing our situational awareness.
Yeah, but you're holding up the phone for those who are only listening and not watching the video.
And what's interesting is I had to do a talk at Google a while back I was invited to go to Google and do a talk, which was awesome. It was great. Brilliant. Some just brilliant people there. And I thought, oh man, how can I reach these guys out of the gate? How can I do it? Well, I have this video that is out of Seattle. It's on a bus in Seattle. And it shows a male walking down with a gun out, like a 9mm gun out, and he's just putting it on people in the in the bus. Everybody in the bus, and for those of you that can't see this, I'm holding my phone up and I'm just immersed in it. Like I'm looking at the screen. I've got my AirPods on, and I'm oblivious to everything else. What am I giving up? I'm giving up my hearing, and I'm giving up my visual on this. This guy was literally going from place to place, just stealing phones, taking whatever he had from people. And what was really interesting was during that part of the video, nobody's talking to anybody. Nobody's warning anybody. Nobody's saying. They're just so shocked that they're coming out of their electronic stupor, basically, and giving this guy, but they're not warning anybody else because they're trying to process what just happened. He finally comes up to one guy, puts the gun in front of him. This guy's immersed in his phone too. All of a sudden the gun comes right into his face. The guy looks up and he does actually a pretty good move. He immediately redirects the gun. He redirects the vector and he goes forward into the guy. So that's good. He got the gun out of the way, and then you think, oh great, he's got the phone in his other hand. He's going to use that to bludgeon the guy or hit him or do something. No. Now imagine this. You've got a gun at you. You redirect the vector. You stand up. You're coming at the guy. He's taking this phone and he's trying to put it into his overcoat pocket. Literally. No. That's how much these things have captured our awareness. He was more worried about cracking a screen than protecting his life. And again, it was all done unconsciously. He was so used to protecting, but this was more important, literally, than his life at that point, protecting this, because that was the first thing that he did, was shove his phone in his pocket. And then, the story is they were able to then everybody jumped on top of the guy and they were able to get him arrested. But it was just a fascinating thing. And what was great was that captured the Google audience right away. Everybody then was ready to listen because they all saw themselves doing some version of that, or they have done some version of that. And listen, there's no illusions, Stephan. These things are not going away. These smartphones are not going away. We just have to be aware of them. We have to be aware of what you're giving up for all this amazing technology. It's my job to recognize and tell everybody, hey, but we still live in a real world. And you're giving up some incredibly valuable situational awareness tools by completely immersing yourself on these phones.
Yeah. Another thing that I learned that stuck with me from your training in 2012 was I'd never heard the term asocial before at the time. I don't think I had, but I was certainly aware of the term antisocial, and having that distinction that you're looking for people who are asocial, who could become or who are already a threat to you, and recognizing that they're asocial so that you can injure them before they hurt you or kill you. And that was really illuminating for me, just knowing what to look for. And maybe you could describe that in more detail for our audience.
Yeah, the differentiation, most of us when we equate violence or aggression or anything, what we're really talking about is antisocial aggression. Antisocial aggression is basically communication, albeit very unpleasant communication. Literally, you could have a knife to your neck, but the criminal's talking to you. That is categorized as antisocial aggression. Okay, asocial violence is devoid of communication. It's just pure action, meaning they're not trying to look at you. They're not trying to communicate with you. They're just trying to end you. And it's a very different thing. So when I had you guys train, you'll notice I was adamant about no talking. I was adamant about being very quiet when you went in. And it's hard for people, especially a group like Tony's group, because everybody knows everybody in such a positive environment. But keeping an asocial training environment where you're not communicating with the other person and you're not trying to do anything other than just, really you're looking at the human body almost in a very laboratory scientific type manner, and you're just learning where on the human body to put your efforts, to make sure that you get the person injured. What's interesting is that's what people come to me and say, like a lot of the things I get from people when they take themselves out of situations is they recognized asocial. They recognized all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute, there's no communication going on here. This person's planning on doing something, and they still have time to exit and get out of there. And that's the biggest thing. Like you're talking about a woman walking through there. The one story I talk about is my friend's wife. She'd been through a little bit of training. She was going to graduate school. They had studied late. It was about 10:15 at night, and they were walking to the parking lot. She had parked on the third floor. Her friends had parked on the first floor of the parking structure. As they're walking in, she sees out of the corner of her eye this sketchy-looking guy walking around. It's at UCSD in San Diego. And I remember she felt guilty. She thought she was judging the guy at that. She like dismissed it out of her mind, going, I shouldn't be so judgmental, And her friends say to her, hey, we'll run you up to your car. She says, oh, no, it's no problem. I'll just grab the elevator. I'll grab the elevator and I'll go up. And she talked them out of it. So they take off. She gets in the elevator. She goes up to the third floor. The elevator door opens. He's right there. That guy that she saw is literally right there in her face. She had a briefcase, and she said the first thing that hopped out of her was just taking the briefcase and it was a hard briefcase, and she just slammed it right into this guy's groin. And then, she balled up her fist on the side, and she hit him to the side of the head, which he then hit the door jamb, the solid door jamb of the elevator, and the guy dropped, and he knocked out. She ran to her car, got in her car, and got away. The question is, everybody says all the time, whatever happened to the guy? We don't know. By the time security got there, he was already gone. Was it a mistake? Was this guy not going to attack her? We don't know that either. She recognized asocial, and she, as Chris, my friend tells me, he goes, hey, my wife is still alive. My son still have a mom. He goes, that's all I care about. This guy, if he just made a socially awkward, move, he made a huge mistake, because to her, she's a small woman, and that was very threatening to her. Now, what was so what was great was, it was great that she had enough training to be able to use that and survive. But the thing that kicked in, she goes, you know what? I had all these nonverbal warnings that I absolutely ignored because I thought I was being judgmental. And she said, I didn't want to put my friends out. I should, there's this thing, especially it happens more so with women than men, where they feel like, oh, I shouldn't react this way. I should be more accepting of people, and oh, maybe they really don't mean that. And the one thing is, we've evolved as humans to where right now we're very reliant on traditional communication. You hearing me talk and going back and forth. But for thousands of years, we had a lot more nonverbal communication going on in our bodies, and that stuff is still hardwired in us, and we need to really just pay attention to it. And we are hardwired to recognize asocial. And really, if you just think about it, Stephan, the only thing that means is all of a sudden there's no communication going on. There's this uncomfortable, and then the person's maybe aggressively moving towards you, or something's happening, and everything's screaming in your body, hey, something's about to happen. And that's that feeling of asocial. And the number one thing that clients come back to me, and it's so funny that you pointed it out, they say that is by far the most profound thing they learned in the training, and the most used information from the training, because they can use it without incident many, many times to protect themselves. They're able to just take themselves out. Like, I don't even think twice. If I feel weird about a situation, even me, I'm highly trained. I'm very good at what I do, but I have no intention to willingly put myself in a situation where I might have to use that information, because I realize that I'm just as easy to be injured as I am to injure somebody else. I have no special, abilities to avoid any of the same injuries that I can put on somebody. I'm just as susceptible. I tell people all the time, from my 30 plus years of doing this and being a master close combat instructor, if I walk out the door and catch a pipe to the back of the head, I go down just like everybody else. But I'm okay. I've made that understanding that yes, I'm vulnerable to all this, and therefore my focus needs to be on what I can control, and what I can control is my response to to a threat, and that's really how I do it. But what's funny is that the people sometimes, especially people that aren't have not trained, sometimes they have this idea that, oh, if I start training, I'm going to want to, I'm going to become violent, and I'm going to want to, karmically, I'm going to bring this into my life. And that's ridiculous. I mean, as far as the karma situation, as soon as people tell me that, I say, hey, well, do you have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen? Because, most codes say you need to have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen. No, yeah, I have that. I go, oh, okay. You know how to use it? Oh, yeah, I know how to use it. I go, oh, so you want a fire? You want a fire to come in your life? That means fire is going to come in your life. Like, oh, no. And I go, okay, well, just because you learn to use the tool of violence to protect yourself, it's the same thing of understanding how to use that fire extinguisher. You hope to never have to use it, but you certainly want to know how to use it if you ever need it. And so that's how I go about trying to educate people on why it's worthwhile to know this, not to turn into a super ninja, not to do anything. But if you really understand violence and you understand how the human body responds to trauma, it takes away a lot of the irrational fears that you have. It's the same thing like when I'll take people, firearms training, and especially people that are very hesitant to learn or scared of firearms. I don't do it from the idea of I want to turn you into, somebody that carries a firearm. What I want to do is I want you to understand how they operate, let you operate them safely, and then the irrational fear of the tool goes away. You realize, oh, okay, not for me, but I know what this thing does, and I'm not going to have this irrational fear about this or give it any more power than it has. I understand it's a very powerful tool if you know how to use it correctly, and it can be a great self-defense tool. But just like anything else, if I don't put the time into it and put a little study behind it, it could actually be detrimental to me rather than helpful. Whereas learning the principles of self-protection, as we put it out, I think really sticks with people. And just the fact that you're talking about the fact that you took it in 2012 and you were able to come, and you and I didn't talk about this prior. You just started rambling off all the different things that were covered during that time, which was impressive.
But when you talked about the gun thing just a minute ago, I just remembered how you taught me to sit down. If I'm holding a gun and somebody's trying to grab it from me, I just go like I'm sitting down, and it ends up gravity points or like science, whatever. It's not really, is it gravity? I don't know. Moves the gun right directly into their chest, and I'm using gravity in my favor, and I don't have to use a lot of muscles to direct the gun right back at them. So I just thought of that as you were talking, and I don't have any occasion to use that. I haven't used that. I practiced that technique in 8 years, and yet, boom, there it was.
Yeah, and that's it. It's a push-pull principle that we talk about, and that's literally what got this type of training originally into the SEAL teams. This is what got the original program. They answered a question having to do with a firearms situation like you're talking about, and that's what was taught. They had looked, then it was called SEAL Team 6, back then it was a counter-terrorist team. They had done a shipboarding, and the lineup, you've all seen like one of those special operations teams, they line up outside a door and they all go in. Well, the second guy going in got held up by a bad guy. First guy's in there fighting for his life. The rest of the guys can't get through because the door's jammed with this guy. The instructor that I found that brought in, that was the first thing that he did. They had not been able to solve this thing at that point at 6 years. He didn't even hear the whole thing before he took every one of these. And I told you, I worked with all the legends of the SEAL team at that time. He'd line these guys up just in there. They replicated the whole thing. Second guy gets caught, and he did exactly what you just said. He goes, hey, sit down. Guy sits down, pulls the guy away from the door, pulls the gun center line so he can take care of the bad guy, and the rest of the guys got in right away. That's when they were sold. That's when they said, we need to learn this type of training, because these principles and methods directly, it's not about punching and kicking. It's about how to use the tool of violence, whether you have a tool like a gun or don't have a tool like a gun. The principles are there. And that just shows me that, it worked. The methodologies that I used in your class, and I'm always worried with Tony's classes because they're usually huge. They're big. The last one I did was like ridiculous. He had like 400 people there. My guys were there. But we're able to get the message across, and we're able to do all of this. And and then to have you like just tell me, like, literally while we're talking, you just come up with another principle or method that we did. It shows me that, yeah, the training methodology is valid because it sticks with people, because you're not having to memorize a set of moves. You're understanding a principle. You're saying, oh, wait a minute, if somebody grabs something that I'm holding, if I pull back, it'll pull center line every time. And just a simple method like that is just retained. And what's so interesting, and I tell people this all the time, and it's kind of, we're doing it in a different way, but, I tell people, don't worry about memorizing this stuff. I said, it's all kind of being taken care of for you as long as you do the training and you go through the methods and principles. They'll be there for you. And what proves to me that is the situation just now. You and I are talking, and then all of a sudden something triggers, and, it just comes back to you. The brain will look for the most effective information it has when it's under threat. And that's what'll start popping up. And so, that's where this stuff comes back to people years later, even though they haven't trained it.
Yeah. Amazing. It's like in your muscle memory. It's just right there, latent or dormant and ready to use. Of course, it probably helps to do a follow-up training, maybe, years down the line, but
yeah, listen, if you want to be proficient at this, or you want to instruct it, or you want to do it, sure. The more you train, the more comfortable you are. But what's interesting is the majority of situations that people find themselves in don't require years and years of training. And, I tell people this all the time. I go, the difference between, say, becoming a combat sport athlete and participating in those type of events and learning self-protection to protect yourself from criminal violence is very different. The first one is the equivalent of me bringing in like a 10 foot by, a 4 foot by 10 foot slab of marble that I bring in, and I bring in the finest, artisan tools for making a sculpture, and I throw it down in front of the class, and I tell everybody, okay, guys, nobody leaves here until I see a perfect replica of Michael's Da Vinci's
Michelangelo's David,
David. Yes, Michelangelo's David. Sorry, mixing up my artists. I think everybody would probably be there for 1,000 years. Just going, good luck. The ability for them to come up with something like that is the same way of taking, say, 1,000 people and putting them through combat sports, and then maybe one of those 1,000 will ever be a competitor of any level, like a top 10 competitor. It's a very rare, small portion of people that can become top competitors. But if I took that same slab of marble, same group of people in the room, and brought in a bunch of sledgehammers and said to them, hey guys, I don't care how you do it, but until I see a pile of rubble, nobody gets lunch. You guys would figure out real fast how to just take that, put a little effort into it, and that marble, I have no doubt that marble would be a pile of rubble, because destruction is a very easy skill set. Becoming a high-level athlete, a combat sport athlete, and taking out direct injury to the human body, that means you have to become very skilled at what you do and very athletic, and it's skill versus skill, and it's highly years of training, and amazing to watch when you see it in action. But what's great is the skill set of destruction is available to everybody as long as you can think and move. I mean, I've had people, I think the oldest guy we've had so far that had to use the information was 81. And the teenager that came at him, the guy was like 18, just a street thug. If you saw them side by side, there's no competition. It would have been ugly. But because the teenager didn't fear the man, and this man knew how to protect himself, he understood, oh, okay, this is available to me. And he was able to literally do a shin kick to the groin first. And then he did 2 other strikes and just caught the kid off guard and knocked him out, and was able to save his own life, against an armed assailant, basically. But that's only because he understood the situation, and he didn't have to do anything beyond, anything athletically beyond his abilities. It was a very simple strike that he did, but he knew how to do it. And he also understood that he had to put everything into it. I'm never worried. We go slow and smooth with people at first, so you understand accuracy and correctness. Your hard and fast is your hard and fast. I mean, however, like I tell people all the time, I line up a bunch of striking bags, and I said, hey, if I told you right now, go hit and kick those things as hard and as fast as you can, whatever your hard and fast is, you have it. What I want to do is make sure that whatever effort you put in goes into a specific area that's going to get you a big result. And that's why you need to slow down and learn your targeting and understand where on the human body to put all that effort. I'm not worried about whether you'll be able to go full speed or not, because you will. And you can ramp it up. I mean, but at the very beginning, you want to lay this foundation of accuracy and correctness, just like firearms training. Firearms training is there's nothing more chaotic than being in a firefight, yet they train very slow and deliberate in firearms. And really, that's the same thing I do, because we're learning a lethal application to protect ourselves using our brain and our body. And it's the same thing. I want you to go slow and methodical and be accurate and correct first before we add speed. And so that's the idea behind it, because the brain doesn't know the difference between fast and slow. The brain's just saying, what do you want me to do? Where do you want me to take your body? And where should I be when I need to use this information? And you're saying, okay, I want to, ultimately I want to be here. I want this 1 square inch of me on that 1 square inch of him. And your brain's processing all of that. And that's the methodology that you guys learned when we were doing our training over the days that we were doing it in Cabo.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. I know we're out of time, so let's tell our listener where to go to learn more. I know you have some free information that I think is maybe in an ebook form that we can send folks to read and access. What's their next step?
Yeah, if you just go to the website, surviveviolence.com, put your email in, we'll not only will you get a book, there's also a course that you'll get for free. If you enjoyed the information that you and I talked about during this podcast, then you'll get a lot more of the same at that area. And again, I like people to really understand. Of course, I'd love everybody to be a client, but I'd like to give out a lot of information to make sure that my methods or principles are right for you. And I think if you go to Survive Violence, you'll get a lot of free material that'll help you determine if it's for you.
Yeah, and that's very generous of you, and I'm sure you're saving some lives who you won't even know who they are or that they even consumed your information. They were never clients, but you're saving lives probably all the time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's rewarding.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tim. And listener, please take this seriously. Think of somebody who could benefit from this besides yourself. So you've got some homework for yourself, but then share this with others so that they can save themselves or save others as well. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Get Yourself Optimized.